Hi everybody, welcome to week 3. It's going by fast. First of all, I want to say thank you to everyone for really giving us some great discussion posts last week. It was wonderful to see your commitment to looking for links to share. Some of you shared some amazing links, and I want to say that many of you were so surprised to read about the situation of refugees in the world. So I hope that this class is bringing you new information and opening your eyes to the world. I mean, that's my goal, so it seems to be working. So this week, we're going to take a little bit of a historical view on anthropology. So this video will be about 15 minutes long. So settle back, and I'll be talking about some items that would be related to chapter 16, which you're reading this week on colonialism, and also taking you a little bit into next week, which is chapter 3. So right now on the screen you have an image that shows you, that reminds you of the 4 fields of anthropology that we've been talking about in the last few weeks. So from now on, when I say anthropology, I'm really focusing on cultural anthropology and looking at people studying other peoples and looking at other cultures. So this will give us a little bit of background into the material that will coincide with the chapter you're reading this week. So when we start thinking about how long ago people started studying other people or encountering other people, it's a little problematic to think how far back we go. We can think of cultures historically and even in prehistory that were coming into contact, that maybe were sharing resources, expanding ideas, conquering territories. So this map kind of gives you some of those ideas. The Romans throughout the Mediterranean, the Vikings, the ancient Greeks, Herodotus, often thought of as the world's first historian. So some of these things I think go a little too far back, and it would turn this class into a history class or a Western Civ class. So I'd like to focus on the time frame of European expansion, and I think this is a time frame that many of us can relate to. We've studied often in history classes. Those of you that are of Hispanic descent or Mesoamerican descent, you're very well aware of your own heritage and the story of colonialization. So this is the time frame that I think makes sense, the period of about 15th to the 19th century, when you had Western Europeans really expanding out to the rest of the world. You had navigation techniques being perfected, and you pretty much had these huge empires, these powers kind of spreading out, finding resources, new foods, new spices, new peoples, new treasures, gold being one of the primo things people were looking for, and really changing the world and what it looked like. So things like the British going throughout the Americas, of course, going into Africa, going into India. You had the French out in the Pacific, out in Africa. You had the Dutch in Indonesia. You had the Portuguese in South America and India as well. And of course you had the Spaniards throughout the Americas, which probably hits us more than anything in terms of their influence. At the same time of expansion and colonialization, you had industrialism going on back in Europe. And so you had a big change in terms of work and conditions, manufacturing. In Britain specifically, I can think of a huge change in how people lived in terms of social classes and social division. That really affected many, many things. And I can also probably think of, it's a time frame where science was really expanding as well. Not only the establishment of universities, but also kind of a rethinking of the natural world, of the biological world, of humans' place within the world. And so this leads me to a discussion that some students are quite surprised in cultural anthropology that we need to have. And so that is bringing up Charles Darwin. So Charles Darwin, for some of you that are not familiar with him, I like to call him Big Daddy in my classes actually, but Charles Darwin probably not only gave us the theory of evolution, but really changed the way the natural world was approached. And so if you ever take a bioanthro class, it is really based on the theory of evolution and evolutionary theory that Darwin presented. So just a quick background of Darwin: a curious person, a person sometimes may be described as a naturalist, had an amazing experience and took a journey around the world on the HMS Beagle. And he really was curious about, what was the natural world all about? Most of you know that in 1859 he published The Origin of Species, a book in which he started to talk about this idea that Maybe the world hasn't always been the same. Species haven't always been the same. There's been change through time. The environment plays a big role in terms of what an organism might have in terms of traits. How they can adapt to their environment is really important. If they are successful, they reach maturity and reproduce and pass those positive traits down. And so these are some of the things that were tied to the understanding of evolution. Now, I know that in our society, in our culture, in our education system, there's a lot of conflict with evolution. There's a lot of conflict because the assumption is that if we talk about change through time with regards to humans, then we disregard people's belief systems and creation stories. And I'm a person that teaches religion as well, so I can be confident in saying I can understand the mechanism of evolution in the natural world. I can also understand the importance of belief in creationism. So I tend to keep those two things separate in my classes. So anyway, why am I telling you about Darwin? Two things. His theory of evolution actually will play a role in understanding early anthropology for us. And second, he was also encountering other people. And so I'm going to give you an example of Charles Darwin's experiences, not to necessarily pick on him, but to give you an idea of what maybe other explorers were encountering and how they felt. So a big part of this story is not just the exploration and the colonization, I should say, but also what was happening with regards of encountering other peoples. And if you think about it, think about Europe at the time. Think about how people lived in their culture and how it might have been kind of shocking and fearful to encounter native peoples, let's say, in the jungle or in the Pacific Islands that looked different, that spoke differently, that ate different things. There was a lot of interaction that led, probably I can say with confidence, to a lot of judgment. So the next slide gives you an excerpt of Charles Darwin's diary and what he wrote about when he encountered the native peoples of Ecuador in South America. And so he writes, and I'll just read this to you, "I never saw more miserable creatures stunted in their growth, their hideous faces bedaubed with white paint and quite naked, their red skins filthy and greasy, their hair entangled, their voices discordant, their gesticulation violent and without any dignity." And I know when I show this quote in my traditional classes, a lot of students are very, very shocked. They feel that there's a lot of judgment, that he's not even calling them people, he's calling them creatures. And if you look at the images, it's kind of giving you this idea of what Darwin's culture looked like and what peoples he encountered might have looked like. It's very, very different. And if you watch any Jane Austen films lately, you know that the culture of the time of upper-class Europe was one of formality, was one of piousness, and so many things that probably shocked these explorers as they encountered native peoples. So the title, The West and the Rest, this is a time frame where I think Western Europe, and then ultimately the United States as well, really positioned themselves as kind of the center, and everyone else just had to catch up, so to speak. As an anthropology student, I was quite shocked when I was reading early anthro theory and found out that these scholars would use words like not only primitive but savage to describe these peoples. And so it is shocking to find that in early anthropology there's a lot of judgment going on. So we're not quite getting to the cultural relativism that you guys read about in Chapter 1. So what happens? Let's continue on. So after Darwin publishes On the Origin of Species, a lot of people read it, a lot of people love it, a lot of people hate it. Somebody named Herbert Spencer read it, and he was one of these guys that loved it. And he coined the phrase survival of the fittest, which some of you might have already encountered in the circles of evolution. Maybe you've encountered it in sports culture, maybe in the business world. It's tied to competition. And the idea being that if you got the goods, if you are fit in your environment, you will survive. If you are less fit, you're not. And these primitive peoples were thought of as less fit and not civilized. And so the idea was that European society became that standard of civilization, and the primitives were judged to be inferior based on that. So this is kind of, steeped in racism if you haven't gotten this message yet. And it was very difficult. It was very difficult for many native peoples. We know our own story in North America as well, and a lot of the indigenous peoples throughout Mesoamerica, as I've already mentioned. So this becomes an understanding of culture, actually. What I'm showing you is a diagram that tends to present evolution in a cultural perspective. that cultures have evolved from savagery into civilization, or if they haven't, then they need help along the way by missionization and Christianization and things that happened during the colonial era. Sometimes this is called unilineal evolution, evolutionism, sociocultural evolution. Your chapter 3 next week, we'll get into this a little bit further. But I'd like to give it to you now because as you read about colonialism, you can start to have this in the back of your mind. And it's kind of funny because this model isn't really how biological evolution works. It's not like we've evolved from a slug to human, but it usually more looks like roots of a tree if you've ever seen a taxonomic classification chart. So this is also very, very dicey, for lack of a better word. So what does this say? Oops, let me go forward, not backwards. There we go. This says that the process by which new cultural forms emerge out of older ones, that those that might be savage, maybe Pacific Islander native peoples, would eventually arrive at civilization. But what is this saying? It's saying that they have no culture, which is untrue, because all these indigenous peoples had their own culture, belief systems, social organization, rituals, ways of life, family structure, but this model negated that. And it argued that each society could progress from savagery to barbarism to civilization. So it's a very, very problematic thing. Ultimately, early anthropologists are called armchair anthropologists, the idea being that they weren't actually going out to see how these people lived, but they were reading accounts that missionaries wrote, that explorers wrote, and making assumptions about how these people lived and what they needed to improve. And I'll just give you some last examples here. Edward Tyler, E.B. Tyler, an early armchair anthropologist, who wrote about religion and said if you look at the model of civilization, the model of religion is monotheism, the belief in one God. And that if you looked at indigenous peoples, maybe some of you are familiar with Native American beliefs, where there is belief in the natural world, that nature is most divine, animal spirits, or in some African indigenous cultures where ancestor worship is predominant. E.B. Tyler described those as savage beliefs, and they were tied to animism or animistic beliefs. Another armchair anthropologist I could tell you about is Lewis Morgan, who wrote about native peoples in North America and judged their family structure and their family living. Of course, noting that monogamy was the civilized form, the most proper form of family. So it's kind of sad to start off our discussion of anthropology from this perspective, but this is historical, and of course this changes. In our class we don't call native peoples savage, we don't judge them to be inferior based from our own civilized world, and now we know that there's many, many places in the world, if you want to talk politics and economics, are growing and surpassing the European and the American model. So for our purposes, as you get into chapter 3 next week, you'll really start to see a new, fresh perspective, and so we will get to the perspective of cultural relativism and the importance of doing field work. And just to give you a little sneak peek, it's going to be Franz Boas who's going to be giving this to us. Franz Boas is thought of as kind of the father of North American anthropology. He was somebody that really wanted to get into the culture, understand everything about the culture. These images are kind of funny because he's really trying to mimic a Native American hoop dance, a group known as the Kwakiutl, traditionally from the northwest coast region of British Columbia. So change is coming. Change will be good for us. Good luck with the chapter this week and your discussion posts. And if you have any questions, of course, don't hesitate to contact me. I'm trying to get back to you guys just as soon as I can. And have a great week. Thanks again. Bye.